reason why I focused on Bangladesh was because it just seemed like people were talking about the humanitarian crisis, but no one was really trying to explore the link, between climate change and security in that region. And at the same time, the entire concept of the United States sort of looking at that region was also, unexplored in the media. So it was definitely something that I wanted to explore more and, investigate.
When it comes to climate change, Bangladesh is ground zero. This low-lying nation, strategically sandwiched between India and China, already suffers from regular catastrophic floods. Any sea level rise here will be an existential problem for the country and a potential crisis for global security.
So now when you look at Bangladesh, it has one of the highest population densities in the world. There are a lot of other problems like Islamic radicalization, poverty. The country is sort of a young democracy, and it's sort of grappling with a lot of grassroots level issues.
By 2050, when Bangladesh's population reaches 200 million, rising sea levels may claim 20% of the country's landmass. Over 30 million people will be homeless, and food production could be decimated.
What I foresee, to start with, there will be internal destabilization within the society. There will be social breakdown of cohesion because groups will fight against another group to find resources to survive. But eventually what is going to happen is we completely understand that these people will try and reach higher and drier ground, and the only way they can move towards is to move to India.
And that may not be possible. India has constructed a 2,500-mile fence on its border with Bangladesh to prevent smuggling of weapons and narcotics and to keep illegal immigrants out.
As a matter of fact, I would call this the world's largest human cage, because India, foreseeing such an eventuality, has already fenced Bangladesh on all three sides and is now in the process of electrifying the fence. The border between Bangladesh and India is about the most lethal border in the world. Over the last 9 years, over 1,000 Bangladeshi civilians have been killed by Indian border guards. Given that kind of a background and a scenario, if you imagine that large number of people are trying to cross over into India, crossing the fence, there will be a human catastrophe because the Indian side is going to resist any kind of border crossing by Bangladeshi climate migrants.
The U.S. Navy is often the first responder in international crisis, and Bangladesh will likely be no exception. The U.S. military is concerned. In 2009, the U.S. Naval War College in Rhode Island conducted its first war game, or simulation exercise, to respond to possible climate change-related conflicts. One of the scenarios looked at South Asia, including the impact of climate change on mass migration in Bangladesh.
One of the findings was that the U.S. Department of Defense noticed that there were a lot of gaps if they were to deal with such an issue. For instance, would the U.S. Navy, which is the first responder during an international humanitarian crisis, have the ships to sort of ferry millions of people to safety? Would they have ships that could, provide potable water to people that they were moving? Also, what about interagency communication? How would, the U.S. Department of State communicate with the U.S. Department of Defense? What would be the level of involvement of all these different agencies? How would they come together and work together to solve this crisis?
So you have an issue of water security. You have an issue of health security, probably going up to the level of pandemics. You have a mass migration of people. You have states' critical infrastructure under stress. And all these are happening at one time, at one point, on a state whose internal capacity of the state is very, very weak and fragile. So we are really painting a scenario which could very easily go down to a meltdown, and we could very possibly even see a state-of-state collapse.
U.S. officials acknowledge that these new challenges would require a shift from the traditional military role of fighting wars. They will require leveraging existing networks of military partners around the world to deal with expected fallout from climate change.
And they realized that they had dealt with humanitarian crisis or, natural disasters in that region. An unprecedented sort of event of this magnitude would require a much larger sort of response, a much more sophisticated response, because this sort of a situation would be very, very complex.
The U.S. and Bangladeshi militaries are collaborating on a range of issues, including counterterrorism, narcotics, and arms smuggling. But they fall short when it comes to climate change and national security.
While at the higher level, this issue of climate change and national security was being talked about and discussed. When you looked at the grassroots level sort of, programs and other sort of military aid being provided to the Bangladesh military, it had yet to trickle down. This whole idea, of climate change, national security.
No military in the world has ever been trained for climate-induced conditions or climate-induced consequences that we are now likely to face. It needs a complete new set of skill sets. It needs retooling. It needs different kind of planning levels. It needs different kind of scenario planning exercises. It needs also compatibility among militaries of the world. We have not done anything of this nature so far. So therefore the militaries of the world have not only got to train on a national basis, they'll go to train on an international basis, so that they're prepared to meet with the consequences when it happens.
What was happening in the Arctic was so interesting to me because the physical changes in the Arctic are so visible right now and are so immediate and are happening so quickly. In 2007, the Arctic ice was at record lows like they'd never seen, and then in 2008 it was the second lowest ice level they'd ever seen, in 2009 the third lowest ice level they'd ever seen.
The reason for disappearing ice is climate change. Not only is there less ice, but the remaining ice is not as thick as it used to be.
Ice that's been in the Arctic has been there for a very, very long time. That type of ice is really thick, and it's called multi-year ice. That's been what's melting, and when it refreezes, it comes back as first-year ice, which is very thin, and most people and animals can't walk on it and can't sort of exist on it.
Multi-year ice shrank by approximately the size of California and Texas combined between 2005 and 2007. Temperatures are rising twice as fast in the Arctic than in the rest of the world. And at this rate, the Arctic could be ice-free in the summers as early as 2013. And that is a game changer.
This opens up what Admiral Gary Ruffhead, our Chief of Naval Operations, calls the fifth ocean of the world, which will again have tremendous impacts on resource extraction, on trade, and the security of all nations.
There's simply more easy navigation, territorial disputes, potential trade opportunities, resource issues, all of which could be leading to conflicts.
It's an ocean. The Navy needs to ensure maritime security in all the oceans of the world.
There's already been some very serious confrontations among countries facing off over who owns not only the right to passage in the Arctic Circle, but even more so the minerals and oil and gas that's underneath it, which is a huge cache of the world's energy supply.
25% of the remaining resources, oil, gas, mineral resources of the world, remain in the Arctic.
The Arctic region covers 1/6 of the Earth's surface. 5 nations, Russia, Canada, Denmark, Norway, and the United States, have territorial borders here. The jockeying for control is already on. In 2007, Russia planted a flag in the waters beneath the North Pole. The Russians are building icebreakers and nuclear power stations on their northern coast. Canada has a new fleet of F-35 fighter jets and plans for a new base on its Arctic shore. Denmark is forming an Arctic command. Even the Chinese are in the game. China already has the world's largest non-nuclear icebreaker and is building more for Arctic exploration. But the U.S. lags behind. 2 of the 3 existing U.S. Coast Guard polar icebreakers are non-operational, and 1 is used for scientific research. And the U.S. has to contract with foreign nations to perform Arctic research, logistics, and supply operations.
the United States military is going to have to consider how it equips itself, for example. I mean, if you look at the Navy right now, they're looking seriously at buying more icebreakers because of the Arctic thawing and the fact that the Northwest Passage may open, and that's an area that you have to have a presence in because of the increased economy there and shipping, etc.
I mean, if the Rear Admiral of the Coast Guard, you know, and in the Navy tells you, like, I don't feel prepared here. I need icebreakers. I need this equipment. I can't operate in the way that you're asking me to. Like, I think that's something we need to take seriously.
The U.S. has no permanent military installations within the Arctic Circle, and the northern U.S. border is so poorly monitored that foreigners have landed undetected on U.S. soil.
German cruise ship was able to travel to the northern tip of Alaska. 200 people were able to get off of Alaska, walk around Barrow, and the mayor, nor the Coast Guard, nor, as far as I know, anyone in the United States knew this was happening.
Both the Bush and Obama administrations said the Arctic is a key strategic interest, but funding to ensure that the U.S. can operate successfully here is far from certain. There is one immediate step the U.S. could take.
The U.S. government was one of the authors of the Law of the Sea Treaty and the prime movers of creating it in the first place, and now we're one of the few countries that's not a signatory to it, despite the fact that many of the most knowledgeable experts in the U.S. government, Republicans and Democrats, military and civilian, have all said that we absolutely need to be a party to the Law of the Sea Treaty, and yet we're not.
Under the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, a nation that can prove its continental shelf extends past the current boundary of 200 miles off its coastline can be granted up to 150 additional miles of seabed. And that can mean billions of dollars in resources.
If we want to preserve the full wide range of options for future generations to go ahead and develop the resources above Alaska, we need to demonstrate persistent presence and ownership of the waters in the areas, the exclusive economic zone, and make an extended continental shelf claim by signing the Law of the Sea above Alaska today. So our actions today shape the future. That's why it's important now.
Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.